Thank you. Yeah, thank you as well to our ASL translator. I always like to pay some respect to these folks because it's very hard work, especially with people who aren't familiar with how this all goes. So thank you very much. Um, so yeah, my name is Kevin Jarbo. I am currently an assistant professor in social and decision sciences at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I'm at now. I use he, they, and we pronouns, especially when it comes to collective work and action. So appreciate sharing this space with you today, and feel free to use we with me anytime that we're connected. I just wanted to share a lot about myself today to kind of focus on how identity influences our sort of job seeking experience and other aspects of staying in our careers as well. Especially when we're kind of like on the search and not knowing exactly what we want to do, but part of that comes with knowing a little bit about who we are. And so, yeah, this is going to be a lot of me talking about myself, and I hope that there are some points of resonance for people here. So I got my undergraduate degree in biology at the University of Pittsburgh, where I continued to do brain imaging research before I pivoted into cognitive psychology and neuroscience for my PhD at Carnegie Mellon. From there, I pivoted again into social psychology and behavioral decision-making, where I finished a postdoctoral fellowship and now have my current position as an assistant professor. And I just started this job as an assistant professor last fall after 18 years in post-secondary education, right? So getting my degree in 2002, finishing in 2006, 6 years of research, 6 years of a PhD, 3 more years of a postdoctoral fellowship before I finally decided, like, I think I want to be a professor, right? And part of the reason I was unsure of that job was because I didn't really know like who I was and what I wanted to do and how I wanted to apply parts of my identity in the spaces and the careers that I would hope to choose and be in, right? And a lot of people don't typically like their institutions in academia. I don't know how well you all follow this, but I mean, not liking your job or career is something that isn't necessarily restricted to academia, but there are things about places and the people in them and the interactions you have that, you know, influence your choice to stay in a certain career path or a certain institution or organization. And I want to talk about the kinds of things that influence me to stay at a place like CMU, to stay in academia for 2 decades, right? And continue to do a job in academia that is a lifelong one. So one big thing here is that identity really impacts what we do, what we want to do, where we want to be, and how long we're going to stay there. And I think a big part of figuring out those first parts related to what we want to do and where we want to be are about seeing yourself in a certain place, being able to do a certain job. And I'm sure a lot of people here have heard this phrase before, seen it in some instance, that it's hard to be what you can't see. And looking at my own identity, taking that into consideration, identifying as a Black man, how much did I see the kinds of things I wanted to be, especially in this field of education? And so this figure that just popped up on the left of the screen here is showing the proportions of teachers in different races in public schools in the United States, and how those numbers and proportions have changed from 1987 and 1988 to 2018 and 2019. Right? And this was research conducted by the Pew Research Center. What I want to draw your attention to, especially taking this particular perspective that I have, is that one, in education, and especially public education, this is a place where students and teacher diversity should reflect what the broader public population is. For students, it seems to be okay. While Black people make up 13% of the US population, about 15% of students in public schools are Black. But currently, only 7% of teachers are Black. And also, despite the kinds of efforts that you have seen or maybe think are happening within education, especially when it comes to recruiting faculty members and teachers, the numbers have actually decreased. And so they've gone from 8% in 1987, which was not great, to 7% in just the last couple of years. And so after 30 years of these DEI related efforts to improve representation, we're still really failing a lot in terms of actually making some dents in that particular area. And so to kind of like put these numbers into even more stark contrast, right? According to the US Census, there's about 1.5 million United States citizens who say that they are faculty members at a degree granting institution. Of that, about 54% or about 800,000 are full-time teaching faculty members or research faculty members. But that number gets really small once you start getting to the number of just Black men, the place where I see myself, right? About 24,000 Black men, 3% of that full-time faculty number are Black men working at some university or college in America. And the vast majority of those folks are at PWI. So yeah, there's a good chance that like as a Black man with a job as a professor, if I'm at a PWI, a predominantly white institution, I might run into some there. But there are about 4,700 predominantly white institutions here in the United States, which means that on average, there are 4 Black male faculties at any school, right? So about 2% of all these 1.5 million faculty members identify as Black men with a full-time job, right? So this kind of leads me to ask the question, like, why would I ever want to become a professor if I could not actually have a real good chance of seeing myself or someone like me in that particular space? I wanted to share now like these different aspects of who I am and the things that I've studied that kind of have contributed to me wanting to stay in this field, stay in these sorts of places, right? And so at the beginning, let you know that I did a bunch of brain imaging research. This was like really cool to me because I got to be at this sort of frontier of using really cool advanced brain imaging techniques. I got to work with really smart people, scientists, neurosurgeons. I used a lot of my research to help plan brain surgeries and study traumatic brain injury early on. And this sort of thing got me into starting to identify as a person who cared about academics and education and science and research. And so I started to not just think of myself as like someone who can analyze brain data to like a brain scientist. And in further pursuit of a possible career in this area, it required getting a PhD, which was also really important to me. And this was also a part of my identity as well, and something that I didn't actually learn until very recently in my life, that like my grandma was a high school teacher in biology. Like I didn't learn that until pretty recently, just getting into my family history. My dad's dad was a teacher and a principal at like through K through 12. And so like education was something that runs in my family. Being a lifelong teacher and learner is something that runs in my family. It skipped a generation. Both my parents are nurses, but my sister taught and my brother also pursued some higher education as well. And, this is a picture of me on the day that I was like, got my PhD hooding ceremony, right? That happened in 2018. And so like, yeah, that day really felt super important to me and shored up another piece of my identity. It brought me closer to my family lineage too, because maybe some of you here might have like had that experience of when you got your college degree or any other degree after that, that it felt like it was your whole family's, or your parents or other family members might walk around like saying that they're a doctor too, because of the achievements that you have in your life, which I was more than happy to share. But there are aspects of my college experience that were really challenging. My father is Liberian, my mom is Filipino, so I was a first generation American, first person in my family to go to college here in the United States. My sister beat me to a master's degree, but I got my PhD. And so, but like being the first in my family to do that and to now be a first generation professor was super important. And while I was a student at Carnegie Mellon, this organization called First Together was about recognizing these identities, this first generation identity, and supporting students who didn't have parents or other family members who they could go to for advice on like how to navigate college. And it was really important to have that sort of resource there, that community of people who identified like me in this particular way to help me figure out the things that were like the unwritten rules of being in college or at any institution for that matter. Right. Another thing, this picture that just popped up is the coat of arms for a fraternity that I am a member of, Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. And it is a historically Black Greek letter organization that was founded in Indiana in 1911. And it was a way for me in joining this fraternity to learn a lot more about my identity as a Black man and what that means to be in an academic space, and to be around a bunch of other people like me, other young Black men who are trying to figure out what it meant to be a young Black man here in America. And to be able to have that sort of support in that space was, again, super important for developing who I am and developing my identity, especially within an academic setting. If it weren't for that, I don't think I would want to have stayed in academia. I wouldn't have not liked undergrad all that much had I not connected with other people who were like me in this way. Other things that shored up my sense of identity was being a student and also an employee at Carnegie Mellon's Center for Student Diversity and Inclusion. There, I was able to connect to a bunch of different resources that were not just related to my identity as a Black man, but also like, what does masculinity mean? Was like my gender identity and you know, being able to say that I identify as like he, they, but still present as cisgender. What does like my religion or my practices of my religion have to do with who I am, right? What does my socioeconomic status mean? What does it mean for me to be a first generation American and a third culture individual? Growing up in the United States as a Black man was not how my dad grew up in Africa or my mom grew up in the Philippines. So I have this culture that's different from both of them and growing up to be something new, right? And so getting to figure out all these things helped me actually integrate who I was as a person and not thinking of myself as putting one identity first, but to see myself in a holistic kind of way. And a lot of things that happen, not just at schools or other institutions, but just broadly in society, there's a lot of places where our identities are either not affirmed or they're actually like invalidated or aggressed against. And if we're not able to live out our true selves in a space, it's really hard to decide where to navigate, what places are safe, where should we go, what should we avoid, right? And when these identities become salient, it can make it really hard to figure out what we want to do, where we want to be, where can we be, right? And threatening places are not where we want to be at anyway, right? But there's so many places where we can be affirmed. And now taking my sort of like passion for not diversity per se, but understanding diversity in order to achieve equity and create inclusive spaces is something that I do by co-directing the data-driven diversity or D3 lab at Carnegie Mellon University. So now we're actually looking at like whether or not organizations have authentic messaging about their commitments to equity and inclusion and how that impacts like students or employees' perceptions of that place, and whether or not that authenticity in the messaging matters to how people think that they will be able to grow and thrive in a space. And so I'm really looking forward to launching some more of the research in that particular area. And then lastly, I am a sneakerhead. I love all sorts of shoes for their tech, their style, the colors or lack of, how beautiful they are or how ugly they are. Doesn't matter to me. Like I love them all. And they're a way for me to, one, express who I am in a very creative way. Like Don mentioned, I'm talking to people all the time. I'm in front of classes of undergrads, and I love to just like see the look on their faces when I wear a different pair of sneakers to lecture every day. but also to be able to see myself and be myself, right, in front of a classroom, when as a Black man throughout my entire educational experience, I've been told to sit in the back of the room, right? That it didn't matter how smart I was, because I was still Black, I wasn't going to get far in this place, right? And so I can look back to teachers who have said that to me, friends, so to speak, and other colleagues who have said things like that to me, right? And be able to stand in front of a class where other young Black men, women, and non-binary people are up looking at me and being able to see themselves in that space doing those things and doing it in a pair of Jordans and not a tweed jacket with elbow patches, right? So these are all these parts of my identity that have been shored up within my college experience, though, within the community that I'm at, within the place where I'm working as my career. And I think it's really important to have these kinds of things in any sort of job or institution, right? The structure needs to be there so that you're affirming people in these sorts of spaces. We, when we're looking for jobs, need to be seeking out these sorts of things, especially if they're not created either. And that's something that influenced me to stay at CMU. Trust me, going to school across the street at University of Pittsburgh, talking to CMU friends, they hated it. It was a really hard, super stressful school to be at. They didn't want to stay in academia. And when I got here, I wondered what it was gonna be like for me. But for whatever reason, like, I'm now here with a job, hopefully for life, in this particular place. And a lot of it had to do with all these things that you all see on the screen. And I think that with my work inside and outside of my institution, it's very strongly driven by these kinds of theories of identity development. We go through different stages of understanding who we are and where we are in developing our identity. And that matters. Like I said from the beginning, it took me 18 years to figure out I wanted to be a professor. In that 18 years, I was becoming an adult independently as well and learning who I was. And those things influenced where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do, and where I saw myself being able to grow and thrive. And these are the kinds of things that we need to put out there for people when, you know, they're looking for jobs or when we're creating jobs for people, right? And I just wanted to use my own experience as an example that hopefully there are some touch points for different folks in here. I know it's centered on my experience as a Black man, but otherwise having a marginalized or minoritized identity, I hope that some folks can understand the ways that they may have experienced aggression against them or invalidations against them at every level of their own employment or employment seeking experiences. And I think we all have a part to play in affirming people rather than aggressing and invalidating. And I think this is a thing that, like, job seekers can look for when they're searching for a job. Things that will not just enhance their professional development and career, but also like their personal experience in a place. And these are the kinds of things that jobs need to provide in order to attract prospective employees, to better support their current employees. Because if you do these things that are identity affirming, they promote growth, they can help add to any sort of progressive cultural change your institution or organization is trying to make. And it boosts retention as well. And honestly, that's the take-home message I wanted to leave for everybody here, that like who we are really impacts the kinds of careers and places where we choose to work and the places where we choose to stay. And so I hope that y'all aren't just looking for a job for today, but you're gonna be your job for tomorrow as well. And that's all I have for y'all, and just really want to thank you all for your time and attention here.